In chapter 23, Jesus delivers a series of woes. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Now, if you look at the slide on the screen with the title of the message, would anybody like to take a guess how many woes Jesus delivers? 7. Very good, excellent. He delivers 7 of them. That would be correct. It's a good Bible number. And so verses 1 through 12 are actually the background, the setup, the foundation for the 7 woes that Jesus is going to deliver. So let's look at those, and there's a key statement made here really kind of summarize it all. So Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but do not the works they do. For they preach, but they do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. For they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues, and greetings in the marketplaces, and being called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." Now, the key statement's in verse 5. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. Moses' seat, they claim that they are the best interpreters of the law that Moses had delivered. Of course, in verse 2, we get that phrase, practice what you preach, because they say one thing and do something else. They lay all these heavy burdens, but don't do anything about themselves. Then verse 5, don't say they do their deeds to be seen by others, but notice how it's described. They make their phylacteries large and lengthen their fringes. Phylacteries were little pouches on their wrist or their forehead that had scripture verses in them. So obviously, if I have a larger phylactery on my forehead, I'm more righteous than you are. The fringes they were supposed to keep at the corners of their garments, and they're supposed to have a blue thread through them, and that was to remind them of God's law. So obviously, if I leave the dangly parts of my robe longer than yours, then I am holier than you are. And that was what he's talking about. They try to impress other people with these giant leather boxes on their forehead and extra long fringes on the corners. And then they love for people to note them and who they are and how awesome they are, being called rabbi and father and all that. And I want to say a word about what Jesus says here. He is not saying that we never use titles. Matter of fact, the Apostle Paul is going to call himself an instructor. He's going to call himself a father to the Corinthians. None of these terms in and of themselves are wrong. The problem here is that they thought the title defined them. If you can't survive without being called by your fancy title, you have a problem. You're not what your title is. Occasionally people ask me, "Are we supposed to call you Dr. Smith?" My mama doesn't. So it's like you don't require people to call you by titles. That was their problem. It's not the idea of titles in themselves. Nothing wrong with that. So if you're the president of your company, that's all fine to be called the president. But the reality is, if that defines you, if you want to require people to do that because somehow it meets some need of yours, then you have missed the total point. And you're where the Pharisees are, always wanting and demanding to be called all these titles. So that's who they are. They want to do all their deeds to be seen by others. Now, Jesus is going to lay into them with a series of woes. The first one's in verses 13 and 14. "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves, nor allow those who would enter to go in." Now, scribes were people that copied the Bible by hand every day, so they knew the Bible well. Pharisees were the really religious people. They were the one with the big phylacteries and the long fringes, and they had all of these rules. I mean, they had tons and tons and tons of rules. They counted 613 rules in the law, and then they added several thousand of them rules to those that were found in the Bible. And so what Jesus says is that they're hypocrites. Now, we'll make sure we understand what a hypocrite is. A hypocrite is not somebody who says one thing and does something else. A hypocrite is someone who says one thing, knowing all along they're going to intentionally do something else. Let me see if I can help you with the difference. If you were to say, "I tell the truth," you just lied. Nobody tells the truth all the time. So you want to say amen, but you're like, "I'm not sure. Does that make me a liar or a truth teller?" Say amen. But none of us, we would like to tell the truth all the time. Now, if I say I tell the truth, and there are times when, for whatever reason, I don't, that does not make me a hypocrite. That makes me a Christian. I'm not perfect. Christianity is not defined by our perfection. Christianity really is we are striving to do better. And we regret it when we don't tell the truth. So the idea is not that I tell the truth. Now, here's a hypocrite. Oh, I tell the truth when they know they lie all the time and they have no intention of ever trying to do any better. That's a hypocrite. It's deliberate and intentional disconnect between what they say and what they do. So if you say, I pray, and then there are days you don't pray, that doesn't make you a hypocrite. It means that you're struggling with the Christian life just like all the rest of us. So don't think, well, man, to be a Christian, I got to have it all together. No, to be a Christian, you know you got Jesus and you're doing better. To be a hypocrite is, I have no intention, no desire to do anything different. I'm going to fake it to everybody else, but I know that that's not who I really am. And so that's why he calls them the hypocrites. And they've piled all these laws up, and then they've added all of these laws then to everyone else. You say, man, your laws are so strenuous, you can't get into heaven by them. And when you lay them on everybody else, they cannot get into heaven either. Now, there's a reason why they came up with all these rules. There's a reason why they lived this way. In 586 BC, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. And many of the people of Israel were taken into captivity in Babylon. Now they asked two questions when they got there, which interestingly are the same two questions that people have asked throughout all of history and still ask today when something terrible happens. Why did God let this happen? And is God still with me? The same two questions people ask today. Now the answer to the second one's pretty easy. Yes, He is. Because God is everywhere and has promised to never leave us nor forsake us. But the answer to the first question is a lot more complicated. Why did God let this happen? A lot of times when people ask that, my answer is, I don't know. He's smarter than me. Because I don't know. I can't give an answer. But when they got there, they came up with an answer. The answer that many of them came up with was the reason that Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, the reason we're in captivity is because we did not keep God's rules meticulously enough. And so out of that time in Babylon rose the Pharisees, whose goal was to keep every single minute detail of the law and to add a whole bunch more to them. So they came up with, the 613 they counted in the Bible, and plus hundreds of more they came up with on themselves. And they said, here, I expect you to keep all of these rules. It'd be like getting a job and they hand you a 600-page manual and say, this is our HR policy. And you're thinking, nobody could keep all of that. That was kind of where they were at. So they've got all these rules. But it gets worse. Woe number 2, verse 15. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You'll see this pattern developing over and over again. You travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. So here is the idea. You've got all these rules you piled on yourself and everybody else, and now you go out and try to convert somebody to become a rule keeper like you. And when you do, all you do is twice condemn them because it's not right. You know, we still have people today who are wrong and are trying to recruit other people to join them in their wrong beliefs. And so he said, it's bad enough that you're doing it yourself, but now you're trying to bring others in with you. Then verses 16 through 22, we get the third woe. Woe to you blind guides, who say if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say if anyone swears by the altar, it's nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that's on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it, by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Now, Jesus is not condemning. All right, let me say this right. If I say Jesus doesn't condemn swearing, you're going, great, I can use all kinds of profanity. It's not that kind of swearing. He's not condemning commitments. I think we should make commitments and we should keep them. Okay, wives, I'm sorry. We have 2 men in here who want to make their commitment to you. The rest of them couldn't care less. I think we should make commitments and keep them. And so the idea here is not, oh, don't commit yourself to anything. The problem here is, here's what rule keepers do. Rule keepers come up with all their rules. Then they find loopholes in their rules. And what we have here is they've come up with all these rules, then they've invented loopholes for the rules. So just imagine it this way. I tell you there are 500 rules you need to keep to get to heaven. Some of you quit before you even tried. You just wouldn't even, no way. But let's say I give you 500 rules. And let's say now on top of the 500 rules, I've got about 12 or 1,300 loopholes to all of these rules. Now, why do they put in loopholes? People put in loopholes because they don't really want to keep the rules or because they want to take advantage of other people. And that's what we have here. They are using these to take advantage of other people. So let me show you kind of the way that it would work. You and I enter into a business agreement. And I look at you and I say, I'm going to swear by the temple that I will keep my end of this deal. And you think, man, if he's going to swear by the temple, he's going to keep it. And then I cheat you. And you say, I understand why you cheated me. You swore by the temple. I look at you and go, yeah, I swore by the temple, but that doesn't count. It only counts if you swear by the gold of the temple. Then I go down the street to your competitor and say, hey, look, let's enter into this business agreement. Your competitor says, all right, let's enter into a business agreement. I say, look, I swear to you by the altar that I'm going to keep my commitment. You say, well, I mean, swearing by the altar, that's pretty serious. He'll keep his commitment. And then I cheat him. And he says, why did you cheat me? You swore by the altar. And I go, yeah, but if I swear by the altar, it doesn't count. It only counts if I swear by the sacrifice that's put on the altar. So this is what they do. They create the rules, then they find loopholes to the rules. And if you don't know all the rules and all the loopholes, I'm going to win over you every single day. And so Jesus is condemning them because of their legalism, but this is what rule keepers do. They come up with all of these kind of loopholes, hair splitting. And let me tell you, when you turn into that kind of person where you're looking for all these loopholes, all these ways of splitting hairs to take advantage of someone or to make a point, it's not going to be good for you or for them. It's like the husband and wife that were not having a good evening, and so they weren't speaking to one another. He needed to get up at 5:30 the next morning to catch a flight for a business trip. But he wasn't going to say anything to his wife. So he wrote down on a piece of paper, would you wake me at 5:30 to catch my plane? And she wrote back, yes. The next morning he woke up about 7 o'clock. We realized 7, he was furious. He looked over on the nightstand and there was a note. It's 5:30, time to get up. So technically, she did what she said, but that's the kind of hair splitting that the Pharisees were involved in. And that's not the way that God wants us to behave. Some of you aren't going to hear anything else the rest of the sermon. You're just thinking, I want so bad an opportunity to do that. I did not suggest it. I'm just saying that's what happens, and that's what they've done. They've split hairs like that to take advantage of people. Then the fourth woe is found in verse 23. 24. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. This is talking about priorities. So what does it mean to tithe mint and dill and cumin? Well, the word tithe means to give 10%. And the Old Testament instructed them to give 10% of all that they had to God. So here's what they would do. They're cooking. Now just kind of think, you're in the kitchen and you're cooking. Now let me just say a couple things here. For some of you, this is a fantasy trip. For those of you, I need to clarify what I mean by cooking. I don't mean the Paul Smith 3 steps to cooking. The steps are take it out of the freezer, open it, microwave it. That's not the kind of, we're talking about like for real cooking. Okay, so you're for real cooking and you've got your tablet and you've got the YouTube video running showing you how to make this meal. And have you ever noticed they go so fast you constantly have to hit pause and rewind, like they don't give you time to catch up and do what they say. But anyway, so you're watching it, and now if this was Old Testament times, this would not be pork. But the Bible now allows us to eat pork. Yes. So you've got your pork loin out here, and you've got your spices out. And so the leader says, okay, now put in this much spice. Okay, now so you put that much spice on like the cutting board, and then you put 10% of it off to the side. Then you take your next spice and do the same thing. And then you're supposed to add something that's made of seeds. So you count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I have 120 seeds. So how many do you have to set to the side? 12, 10%. Good, excellent. And so now you get all those, and then what do? You bring them to church. And you give them. So what he's saying is they were so meticulous and detailed in their rule keeping that they were tithing their salt and pepper. They're everything, and yet they were neglecting what is more important, which is justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Now, it's very interesting. He says you should have not left the others. You should be faithful in keeping God's instructions, but we need to make sure we got our priorities right. Tithing the mint and the dill and the cumin is not more important than issues of justice. If you define your Christianity because of some rules you keep, but you're not involved in justice and mercy and faithfulness, you are not being obedient to God. And that's the problem that they have here. So notice how he describes it. You're straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. It's called hyperbole. Overstate the case to make the point. So here's what he's saying. You're straining the bugs out of your food. That's never a bad thing. He says you're so careful that you make sure there are no gnats that get through, but you let the big old camel get through and you swallow it. And so that's the kind of the image that he gives here. So let me tell you, look, what's more important? Making sure that your children make their bed or that they follow Jesus? Now that doesn't mean that you shouldn't teach them to make their bed. Clean up their room occasionally. Do laundry every once in a while and bathe with some regularity. Like all that's fine. But if that's all you're teaching your children, you're missing the point. Because the most important thing to teach them is to follow Jesus. You do the others, but make sure you have them prioritized correctly. And the problem is the Pharisees have their priorities out of whack. Now the next two woes, Numbers 5 and 6, are the same, just with different imagery. So verse 25, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean. Then in verses 27, 28, we get the sixth woe, which is the same thing basically. Woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You're like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Now, you know what he's saying is obvious. If you want to drink out of a cup, you want it to be clean on the inside. Like you don't go, well, the outside's clean, doesn't matter about the inside. That's what they are. They made sure the outside looked good, but the inside was dirty. But I want to make sure we don't miss what Jesus is saying here and that we don't misapply or misinterpret this. Jesus is not saying that as long as the inside is clean, the outside doesn't matter. He's not giving an either or. It's not dirty on the inside and clean on the outside, or clean on the inside and dirty on the outside. What he's saying is make sure that you're right with God on the inside. Then that will affect the outside. In other words, you can't say this. You can't say, well, I swindle people and I cheat on my spouse and I do drugs and I lie all the time and I'm constantly watching porn, but it's okay because I'm clean on the inside. Like that's not acceptable, and that's not what Jesus is saying. What Jesus is saying is you and I should look the way we live like we are followers of Jesus. It should look. But if all you're doing is faking it on the outside, you're just like the Pharisees. That's all they cared about is what people saw, not what was correct on the inside. So don't think that Jesus is saying, well, as long as I'm right with God on the inside, then how I live does not matter. That is not biblical. The way we live should be affected and determined by the fact that we are clean on the inside with Jesus. So don't just, they're just kind of caught up with the outside rather than the inside. So what Jesus is saying is that, the real goal is not some kind of righteous external, but it is a right internal. That I'm right with God on the inside. Then he gets to the seventh woe, and this one's a little bit longer because it's going to be the last one. So verse 29, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Now let's start at the end because we get these two people mentioned here. Who in the world is Abel and Zechariah? Well, many of you will be familiar with Abel. We have Adam and Eve, and they have sons, Cain and Abel, and then later Seth. Now, one of these sons dies. He's killed by his brother. Which one is it? Yeah, it's right there in the text. Yeah, it's Abel. So Abel, right? Abel. That's the first murder recorded in the Bible. Now, in your Bible, Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. That's the order we have. The Hebrew order in the Hebrew Bible is actually different. The last book is 2nd Chronicles. And if you want to know all the ins and outs of that, make an appointment. I'll cover it all with you for a couple hours. Then you'll go, why did I do that? But anyway, so all the books are the same. It's just there's a different order to them. Now, why is that important? Because the last murder recorded in the Bible is recorded in 2nd Chronicles. And it's the murder of who? Zechariah the son of Berechiah. So here's what he's saying. From the first murder in the Bible to the last murder in the Bible. So he's saying that you have rejected all of Scripture. You've rejected all of the Bible. But how have they rejected it? Well, verse 30. It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible because it's so us. You said, oh, if we would have lived then. Really? Well, let's just think about this. How many of you are familiar with the story of Moses? You've seen a movie, you've read the Bible. Okay, about half of you. So for the rest of you, rent the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, rent The Prince of Egypt if you like the cartoon version, or even better, open the Bible to Exodus. So since at least half of us don't know the story of Moses, I'll give it to us so that we all are kind of caught up. So there's a guy named Moses who's watching his father-in-law's sheep. That's his job. He worked for his father-in-law. That's kind of a whole story in itself. So remember, he encounters God in this burning bush, and God says, I want you to go down to Egypt, where all the children of Israel are slaves. I want you to deliver them. Moses said, nah, I can't do that. So after negotiating with God, God wins the negotiation. As he always does. And so Moses goes down to Egypt. Now, some people see this as a contest between Moses and Pharaoh, who's the king of Egypt. But it's not a contest between them. It's a contest between the God of Israel and the gods of Egypt. Now, when we have a contest between the God of Israel and any other gods, who always wins? The God of Israel, because he's the only real God. The rest are fake and make-believe. So they get down there, and I started to say 10 quarters, but that'd make like 2.5 contests. So it's broken down into 10 periods, 10 events, and called the 10 plagues. Now, it's really kind of humorous and ironic and sad that the magicians of Egypt, for the first couple of miracles, can duplicate them. It's great. We have dead fish because the Nile's turned to blood. So what do the Egyptian magicians do? More water to blood, more dead fish. Man, that's really helpful. Hey, Moses brings a bunch of flies. And the magicians bring more flies. And so it's like, woo! And finally they go, man, we can't even keep up with this guy, Moses. And so we have the 10 plagues. And after the 10 plagues, Pharaoh finally relents and says, y'all can leave. And so the children of Israel leave. They've been slaves for hundreds of years. Now they are set free. They get out in the wilderness. And what's the first thing they do? Complain. Complain. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking just like Matthew 23:30. Oh, if I would have been there, I wouldn't have complained. I would have been rejoicing that I've been set free from slavery. I would have been rejoicing that we have manna to eat. I never would have complained. I know, because you never complain. It's too hot, too cold. The seats are too soft, too long. The sermon goes too long, it's too short. You never complain about anything. Yeah, if I'd have been there, oh, no, I wouldn't have been there. Oh, no, I wouldn't have worshiped the golden calf. Oh, no, not me. Oh, when it came down to it, and who are they going to follow? Me, man, when Moses said, who's on the Lord's side, come here. I'd have been the first one over there. Oh, yes, I would have. Because I'm righteous and holy. Man, I'm telling you, when 12 spies came back, and 10 of them said, we can't take the land. But 2 said, no, we think God wants to give it to us. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I'd have been one of those 2 spies. I'd have said, man, we've never battled anything. We have no weapons, no idea what we're doing, but let's go. We can take them in God's name. Yeah, right. None of you have ever been frightened. None of you have ever failed due to cowardice. You've always been on the front line. You've always been bold and courageous. Yeah, if you'd have been there. Oh, yeah, if you'd have been one of the 30,000 that Gideon started with, you'd have survived the cut. You would have been one of the 29,700. You'd have been one of the 300. Yeah, right. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Because every time we read the Bible, we always see ourselves as one of the heroes. Matter of fact, I'll be honest with you, God would have had me at the burning bush, not Moses. That's how we are. I mean, we think if I would have been there, I would have been fine. I never would have complained. I never would have quit. I never would have backed out due to cowardice. I'd have been on the front. Everybody would have been impressed with me. That's not the reality. I know you say that and you think that, but you don't live like that. And that was the problem. That's what Jesus is addressing in the 7th woe. They were all like, oh man, if we'd have been there, we'd have been faithful. We wouldn't have backed out. We wouldn't have complained. We would have been cowards. We'd have stuck right with it to the end. And Jesus says, no, that's not the case. Now here's what's really kind of frightening about this. What Jesus is addressing here is they knew the story of Moses. They knew about complaining in the wilderness. They knew about Gideon and all the other 16 judges. They knew all of this, but they didn't live it. Knowing the Bible is great. I think we ought to know the Bible. I think we should read it with regularity, meaning every day. I think we should know the Bible. But to know it and not do it, in some ways is worse than not knowing it and not doing it. Like to know to do right and to not do it is over. So they knew it and they thought, well, man, we would have been like this. But the reality is, no, their lives didn't match it. In other words, they're kind of like the couple that sat down on a Friday night with nothing to do and decided they'd watch a movie. They spent the next 3 hours surfing Netflix, but never actually watched a movie. Like they knew everything that was on, but they didn't watch any of them. And sometimes we're guilty of surfing the Bible, but never watching the movie. Knowing what's in it, knowing the stories, knowing who Jesus is and all that, but never doing it. Man, we don't just need to know it, we need to do it. We need to live it. And so that's what Jesus is really getting at here. Now, there are 7 woes, but all of them say the exact same thing. All of them condemn the same thing. All of them give us the same warning. And that is, it's not your checklist that matters. It's your heart that matters. Over the years, there's one question I've gotten with pretty consistently. When I give someone my email address, where did that come from? My nickname's been Dr. Chicken Man for a long, long time. Long time. And so people ask. And so it's a good conversation starter or a conversation ender, depending on, I guess, how you take it. But the reason that Chicken Man's been my nickname for 3.5 decades or longer, I guess, is because I used to manage a Kentucky Fried Chicken. And so I got the name Chicken Man when I was young, just had it. You know, the Bible says that God called Amos from behind the plow, and he called me from behind the chicken fryer. Now, the way it was set up in those days, where there were 2 managers of a store, one would work all day Monday and all day Tuesday, open to close. The other one would work all day Wednesday and all day Thursday, open to close. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the busiest days in the service industry, they would split. One would work, they'd each work half a day. So it fell to me to work the all day Thursday, all day Friday, and then Friday morning shifts. So when I would arrive on Wednesday morning, there would be on the desk in the manager's office a list of all the things that the other manager had wanted to do, and then check, did that one, did that one, did that one, did that one, that one. Now y'all know what that is. That's not a checklist. That's a challenge. So the first thing on Wednesday morning is I've got to make a list. And my list always had to be longer because he only worked 2 days and I had 2.5. So I had more hours, so I needed to obviously do more because he wasn't coming in until Friday afternoon. So I needed to make sure to, get the value of my hours. And so I'd make my long list and I'd check the list. Now here's what's interesting. You can look at the list, clean the freezer, clean the stove, replace ceiling tiles, wash the trash cans, clean the back porch, make coleslaw, which is why I don't eat it today. Cut chicken, it's a long list, all this stuff. All that stuff that we would do, none of it made the chicken taste any better. Like all that stuff was important, but the reality is nothing that showed up on the list was really the core of who we were. The core of who we were, it was chicken and fixins. In other words, nobody ever came in and said, man, the chicken just tastes extra special today. Must be because that chicken man guy cleaned the back porch. Boy, these potatoes, the consistency just is exquisite. Has to be because he polished the copper pipes underneath the sink. That's got to be the reason that the potatoes are just better. In other words, all that stuff, though important, wasn't really the core of what it meant. The core of Kentucky Fried Chicken is to sell chicken. Please don't maybe try to explain this. And chicken's to sell chicken. And you don't have to know all the details about that. You don't have to know that it's cooked in a pressure cooker at 375 degrees, all vegetable sorting for 13.5 minutes. You may not know the 6 enemies of shortening, which y'all probably like, oh no, please tell me you ain't going to give us, I'm not going to give you all that stuff. So here's what Jesus is saying. Be very careful that you don't make your Christianity a checklist and then you take your checklist and compare it with somebody else to decide who is the holiest. Don't judge people by your checklist. Those things that we do are important, but they're not the core of who we are. The core of who we are is chicken sellers. The core of who we are is people who are right with God through His Son, Jesus Christ. Christianity is not our checklist. It's not the look at all the things that I have done. And if you do those things so that other people will be impressed by you, you definitely have missed the boat. We want to do those things because of who we are at our core, and that is people who have been forgiven by Jesus Christ. And Jesus says the reason He gives all these woes is because there's a temptation for the checklist mentality to compare ourselves with others, to make ourselves feel righteous. What makes us righteous is not our checklist. It is what Jesus Christ has done for us. And so it's not about our external performance. It's about being internally right with God.